She was a CEO, a powerhouse of ambition and style, but in that sterile corporate lobby, she was nothing more than an invisible woman. For 2 agonizing hours, she was kept waiting, a powerful black woman dismissed by a receptionist in a system that saw her as an annoyance, not an asset. She watched the ticking clock and felt the humiliation burn, unaware that the men who just insulted her had no idea who they were dealing with. She was about to give them a meeting they would never forget and a lesson that would change their entire company forever. Hey, welcome back, and if you're as fired up as Amara is, hit the like button and subscribe right now. Don't let this story end here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Amara Jade was only 28, but she had already built a powerhouse tech company from nothing. She was the definition of self-made, having started her software firm with a laptop and a loan from her grandmother. Today was supposed to be the biggest day of her career, a multi-million-dollar acquisition meeting at the headquarters of Everest Investments. Amara was dressed in a sharp navy suit, her confidence radiating, but the moment she walked into the lobby, something felt wrong. The marble floors and silent, oppressive wealth of the waiting area seemed designed to intimidate. The receptionist, Bethany, a young, blonde woman barely older than Amara, didn't even lift her head. Amara announced herself, but Bethany simply gestured toward a leather chair and mumbled, "Someone will be with you." The next 30 minutes were agonizing. Amara watched Bethany scroll through her phone, occasionally chatting with a colleague about weekend plans. Then, a white man in a rumpled gray suit walked in, clearly late. Bethany instantly brightened, called him Mr. Davies, and quickly ushered him through a hidden door. Amara's heart started to pound with confusion and a rising heat of offense. This wasn't a mix-up. This was a statement. Her mind flashed back to a conversation she'd had just last week with her elderly mentor, Mr. Harrison. He had warned her about the old guard in corporate America. "Amara," he'd said, his voice soft but firm, "composure is your weapon. They'll try to rattle you with small, disrespectful cuts. Don't let them see your blood. Stay collected. Your business speaks for itself." His advice now felt flimsy against the weight of the disrespect she was facing. She took a deep breath, trying to channel his calm, but the anger was a physical, buzzing force under her skin. She had worked too hard to be treated like an annoyance. She had earned her seat at this table. 1 hour passed, then 2. The lobby was now completely silent except for the annoying tick of a massive grandfather clock. Amara stood up, feeling a dizzying mix of humiliation and pure, blinding rage. Just as she was about to demand to speak to someone, Bethany finally looked up, her expression utterly flat. "Oh, sorry," she drawled, not sounding sorry at all. "We've decided to cancel your meeting. Mr. Thorne is no longer available." At that exact moment, the door to the conference room opened. Amara saw Mr. Thorne, the CEO of Everest, laughing loudly and slapping the shoulder of the same man who had been ushered in ahead of her, shaking his hand as if he'd just signed a billion-dollar deal. Amara's blood ran cold, but she wasn't leaving without a fight. She marched directly to the receptionist's desk, her expensive heels clicking sharply on the marble. Her voice, usually warm and confident, was now tightly controlled, vibrating with barely contained fury. "I need an explanation, Bethany. I have been sitting here for 2 hours. That is unacceptable business conduct. Why was the meeting canceled, and why was Mr. Davies just seen leaving Mr. Thorne's office?" Bethany didn't flinch. She just straightened a stack of papers and shrugged carelessly. "It's policy, ma'am. Mr. Thorne had a change of heart. We'll be in touch." Through the crack in the closing office door, Amara saw Mr. Thorne glance out, make eye contact with her for a brief, cold second, and then quickly shut the door, leaving her standing there utterly dismissed. She walked out of the Everest building in a daze, her whole body shaking. The humiliation was heavy, pressing down on her chest like a stone. She got into her sleek black car, and before she could even turn the key, her phone rang. It was her father, James. He always seemed to know when she was struggling. His warm voice instantly broke through her frantic thoughts. "Hey, sweetie, you sound like you just ran a marathon. What happened?" She burst into tears, explaining the whole degrading 2-hour ordeal. James listened patiently, then reminded her of her grandmother's philosophy. "Honey, you know what your grandmother always said?" James's voice was steady and comforting. "Don't just get mad, get even. But you do it with a smile, and you do it so big, they don't even see the knife coming." He told her that true power wasn't about shouting. It was about strategically outmaneuvering the people who underestimate you. His words were the anchor she desperately needed. She wiped her eyes, feeling the cleansing wash of resolve replacing the bitter taste of defeat. The feeling of being dismissed for something she couldn't control solidified her purpose. She wasn't just mad anymore. She was motivated. She sat for a moment, letting the rage settle into a cold, hard focus. She remembered a conversation with her mother years ago about the importance of connections and fighting silent battles. Amara opened her phone, scrolling through old contacts. She found an email from her mother's best friend, a former journalist, sent years ago, containing an obscure, unlisted contact number. The name attached to the number was simply The Ghost. It was a long shot, but Amara had nothing left to lose. She took another deep breath, her eyes blazing with renewed purpose, and pressed call. The humiliation was over. The reckoning had begun. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. It was a low, gravelly sound, ancient and weary, belonging to a man named Lennox. Amara, still gripping the wheel of her car, recounted the entire 2 hours of disrespect and the outright cancellation of the crucial meeting. She told him about the smug Mr. Thorne and the entitled look of the man who had been ushered in ahead of her. Lennox listened silently, not interrupting once. When she finished, the silence on the line was heavy. His response wasn't what she expected. "That's typical," he said, his voice flat. "But it wasn't a mistake, Amara. It was a warning, and that's a pattern as old as Everest Investments itself." Lennox revealed that he had once worked for the company decades ago, and he spoke of the deep-seated old guard mentality that poisoned its roots. He hinted that the current CEO, Mr. Thorne, had learned a lot from his father, the infamous founder, Harlan Thorne. He warned Amara that this wasn't just about a single missed meeting. It was about an ancient prejudice that viewed her success as a threat to their established order. He suggested that her experience was a heartbreaking reflection of a dark history they had desperately tried to bury. He told her she was playing a game with people who changed the rules when they were losing. The memory of her mother, strong and perpetually hopeful, flooded Amara's mind. She remembered the early days of her mother's catering business, tried to secure a simple bank loan to buy a better oven. Amara, a child then, recalled sitting quietly in waiting rooms while managers with dismissive eyes told her mother, "We can't take on that risk." She remembered the forced smile her mother wore, but she also remembered finding her later, silently crying over rejection letters, the sheer weight of continuous failure visible in the slump of her shoulders. Her mother never spoke of racism, only bad luck, but Amara, even as a child, had sensed the deep, unspoken wound. Lennox brought her back to the present with a sharp, cold demand. "If you want to fight, you have to know what you're fighting. The truth is in the archives. I'll get you access." He then dropped the bombshell. "Look for anything related to the founder, Harlan Thorne, and the early 80s. It's where the true rot began." Amara spent the rest of the night setting up the secure access he provided. It was a digital treasure trove of old internal documents and memos. As she started sifting through the first 100 files, her heart hammered. Then, a name jumped out at her from a 1985 rejection letter. It was her own mother's business name. Lennox's challenge was immense, a monumental task of corporate archaeology. "You have to expose the truth they thought was long buried," he instructed, his voice echoing in the dead silence of Amara's apartment. "Your revenge won't be a speech on the news. It will be the facts that dismantle their entire operation. He gave her encrypted login details to a server containing decades of Everest's internal records. It was a massive, unfiltered data dump, and Amara knew she had to find a needle in a haystack. She promised him she would use the information to achieve justice, not just personal retribution. The work itself was mind-numbingly tedious. She spent the next 2 days immersed in the dry, dusty language of old financial reports, executive meeting minutes, and quarterly reports from the 1980s. She found expense reports detailing extravagant lunches and memos about office supply orders. Hours bled into days, and the initial fury began to subside, replaced by exhaustion and doubt. Maybe Lennox was wrong. Maybe she was wasting her time. This was worse than trying to find a single grain of sand on a mile-long beach. She almost closed her laptop, tempted to give up and simply pursue her career elsewhere, forgetting the entire miserable experience. She decided to search one last, desperate keyword: decline. Instantly, hundreds of results appeared. She clicked on a file labeled Loan Committee Rejections, Q4 1985. There, listed clearly among the declined applications, was the name of her mother's small catering business. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the official confirmation. The reason listed was generic, insufficient collateral, but attached to the electronic file, as if someone had forgotten to shred it, was an image of a handwritten memo on Harlan Thorne's personal letterhead. The writing was looped and confident. Amara leaned in, her eyes wide with shock, reading the words scribbled in heavy black ink. It stated, "Decline this and any future applications from minority-owned businesses. Our portfolio must reflect our values. Do not file this note." Amara felt a physical lurch in her stomach. The vague corporate insult from her own meeting with Mr. Thorne suddenly had an ancient, specific, and racist precedent written by his own father. This wasn't bad luck. It was a targeted, decades-old policy of hatred. The pain of her mother's rejection and her own 2-hour humiliation connected across the years. Amara couldn't breathe. She didn't call Lennox or her mentor. The first person she needed to see was the only one who truly understood the weight of that document. Clutching the printed copy of the damning note, she drove straight to her father, James. She found him in the garage, tinkering with an old car engine, his hands greasy and his mind clearly focused on his work. She didn't speak. She just shoved the documents into his hand. James wiped his hands on a rag, adjusted his reading glasses, and began to read the formal rejection, then the handwritten note. His face crumbled. He didn't shout or look angry. Instead, his eyes filled with tears, and he sank onto a stool, his frame shaking with silent sobs. "We knew," he whispered, the words ragged. "Your mother and I, we knew it was about more than just the money. We were told it was just a bad fit, but we always suspected. We got this information years ago, but we burned the evidence. We kept it from you, Amara. We couldn't let their hate define your future. We wanted you to believe that hard work was enough, that their poison wouldn't touch your drive." His confession was a profound moment of heartbreak and misplaced parental protection. Amara hugged him tightly, the old wounds of their family finally bleeding into the open. As the initial shock subsided, she found herself not just raging, but remembering her mother's light. Her mother's unwavering optimism, her insistence on seeing the good in people, and her belief that true kindness was not a sign of weakness, but the ultimate strength. This memory steadied Amara, shifting her focus from personal revenge against Mr. Thorne to an overwhelming need for public justice for all those who had been victimized. Her mother's legacy demanded more than simple retribution. As they sat, exhausted, James suddenly remembered a crucial detail. "The contact you called, Lena. Your mother's best friend," he said, wiping his face. "She was the one who got us those rejection papers. She wasn't just a friend. She was an investigative journalist looking into Everest back then." He explained that Lena had been actively documenting a pattern of discrimination, but her research was eventually stolen after a suspicious break-in at her home. The Thorne family, he admitted, had deep, far-reaching pockets and ruthless tactics. She always suspected she was targeted because someone inside was talking, James murmured, looking at Amara with sudden, urgent fear. She was certain there was a mole working to feed information to Everest. Amara froze. The realization hit her like a physical blow. If the Thornes had a mole inside an investigative journalist's life decades ago, what were the chances that Mr. Thorne had a pair of eyes and ears working inside her current company right now, watching her every move? If you're loving this story so far, don't forget to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. Amara was shaking as she called her mother's best friend, Lena. The thought that the same conspiracy that crushed her mother years ago was now threatening her own company was terrifying. Lena, the former investigative journalist, confirmed James's story immediately. Yes, Amara, they threatened me. They made me feel crazy. They stole all my documents. Lena's voice was tired but firm. She revealed that the Thorne family had powerful associates everywhere, not just in banking, but in local government and even private security firms, all geared toward maintaining their market dominance and protecting their secrets. This wasn't just a business rivalry. It was an entrenched system fighting to keep her out. Amara spent the day walking alone in Central Park, the vastness of the city helping her process the overwhelming scale of the conspiracy. The revelation that her mother's struggles were engineered, not just bad luck, ignited a cold determination inside her. Her mother had fought against this silent evil her whole life and never let it break her spirit. She realized her own rage was a form of inheritance, but she had to use it to achieve true justice, not just cheap revenge. She thought about her mother's strong hands and her unwavering belief in the power of a fair chance, and Amara knew she could not back down. She owed this fight to her mother's memory. Lena eventually called back. She explained that she had suspected a setup, so before the break-in, she had backed up a crucial section of her research. I hid it in a place only your mother and I knew about, Lena confessed. It's yours now, but you have to promise me one thing. You use it to expose all of it, not just for your company, but for everyone they ruined. Amara agreed instantly, promising to use the information to change the system. Then, Lena dropped the final piece of ice-cold information that sent a shiver down Amara's spine. They have eyes on you, Amara. The mole that helped them steal my research decades ago is definitely at work right now, likely feeding information about your acquisition plans to a rival firm. The threat of a mole inside her own walls was paralyzing. Amara immediately started looking at her inner circle, feeling a profound sickness of suspicion. The person who stood out was Julian, her trusted head of business development. Lately, Julian had been unusually stressed, pushing hard for a risky merger with a smaller competitor, a move Amara instinctively felt was wrong. She knew she couldn't confront him without proof, so she had to be subtle. She felt a deep, sickening pain because Julian had been with her company since its second year. The thought that someone she trusted could betray the dream they built together was worse than the insult at Everest. The conflict was agonizing because Amara ran her company on genuine trust and empathy. She had always treated her employees like family, offering flexible schedules and generous bonuses. She was a CEO who knew her employees' kids' names. This was the sharpest contrast to the cold, clinical machine that was Everest Investments. This made Julian's potential betrayal a deep, personal cut. It highlighted the cruel reality. The kinder you were, the more vulnerable you were to those who exploited that kindness. She had to put sentiment aside and secure her company. Amara decided to set a classic trap. She created a fictional, highly sensitive document detailing a secret strategy to pivot the company toward a completely different sector, including a specific, unique code name that would never be mentioned anywhere else. She leaked the fake document only to 3 top executives, including Julian, sending it late at night via a secure, personalized link. The next day, she kept her distance. By lunchtime, her anxiety was nearly unbearable. Then, while she was pretending to review schematics in the server room, she saw Julian sneak down the hallway and step into a seldom-used utility closet. She pressed her ear against the thin door. She heard Julian, his voice low and rushed, talking on the phone to an unknown recipient, mentioning the exact code name she had invented for the fake pivot strategy. Amara waited until the end of the day, demanding to see Julian in her office after everyone else had left. The lights were low, the atmosphere thick with unspoken accusation. Amara didn't shout. She simply placed the evidence, the printed fake document, on the table. "I know, Julian. Tell me everything." Julian's carefully constructed composure fractured instantly. He tried to deny it, his voice squeaking with nervous energy, claiming it was a misunderstanding. But when Amara calmly recited the code name he had used on the phone, he collapsed, burying his head in his hands. Julian was a wreck. He confessed everything. He was drowning in debt from a nasty divorce and a failed real estate investment. An associate of Mr. Thorne, an old acquaintance, had approached him with an offer: sabotage Amara's acquisition talks and push her toward the disastrous merger, and they would clear his debts and give him a 6-figure job at Everest Investments. Julian admitted he admired Amara and hated what he was doing, but the fear of losing his house and his reputation had driven him to it. It was a classic tale of heartbreak and desperation exploited by the powerful. The betrayal was heartbreaking, but Julian's vulnerability was real. He begged for forgiveness, telling Amara that he knew he could never be redeemed, but he needed her to understand that the system had eaten him alive. He swore that the Thorns were ruthless and would stop at nothing to eliminate Amara as a threat. He knew he was ruined, but he offered one final, desperate piece of information to buy back a sliver of his conscience. He leaned in, his eyes wide with fear, and whispered a name Amara had never heard before: Patrick O'Malley. "Thorne isn't his real name," Julian revealed. "He changed it years ago. He was Patrick O'Malley." The name Patrick O'Malley meant nothing to Amara. She immediately put her tech team, the few she still trusted completely, on the case, tasking them with finding any connection between the current CEO, Mr. Thorne, and this unknown name. It was a digital hunt for a ghost. The corporate records were useless, as O'Malley's trail seemed to disappear 20 years ago when the name change officially took place. Amara felt a surge of frustration. Julian's confession, which seemed like a breakthrough, was now hitting a dead end. Was this just a side story, a dead-end lead? She felt the need to talk to her father, James, again. She called him and asked, "Dad, do you recognize the name Patrick O'Malley? A man from the 80s?" James paused, the silence on the line lasting a tense, agonizing few seconds. When he spoke, his voice was tight with bitter recollection. "O'Malley. Yes. Patrick O'Malley was a small-time loan manager at the bank that rejected your mother's loan, the one right before the official rejection came through." James recalled the man's smug, condescending smile, the way he had dismissed her mother, claiming that people like us just didn't understand the market. He remembered the man boasting that he was just following orders. The puzzle pieces clicked into a terrifying mosaic of long-planned malice. Amara rushed back to her computer, accessing the Everest Investments archive that Lennox had provided. She cross-referenced Patrick O'Malley with Harlan Thorne in the year 1985. The system spat out a single file, a confidential internal memo detailing a massive bonus and a sudden, significant promotion for a new hire named Patrick O'Malley. The timing was precise. The promotion was awarded just 3 weeks after her mother's loan rejection. The paper trail, hidden for decades, was right there. The memo contained a handwritten note at the bottom, signed by Harlan Thorne himself. It was a simple, chilling sentence of congratulations to O'Malley. It said, "Excellent work handling that situation. You show great potential for this firm's future." Amara stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. The man who had personally caused her mother's deepest financial pain was not just some minor manager. He was being rewarded by the most powerful man in the company for carrying out a discriminatory policy. And now, that same man, having changed his identity and moved up the ranks, was the CEO of Everest Investments, ready to crush Amara. The realization was a punch to the gut. The man who had kept her waiting for 2 hours, the man who laughed while closing the door in her face, was Patrick O'Malley, the architect of her family's financial heartbreak decades ago. He hadn't just inherited the old system of hate. He was a founding pillar of it, rewarded for his malice, and now reigning as the powerful Mr. Thorne. The whole humiliation was no accident. It was the final, arrogant insult from a man who had been discriminating against her family for generations. Amara was consumed by a raw, white-hot fury. She wanted to stand outside Everest and scream the truth to the world. Just as she was about to make a rash, emotional move, her phone rang. It was her mentor, Mr. Harrison. He sensed her inner turmoil, speaking gently but firmly. "Amara, you've confirmed the past. Now you must plan the future. Revenge is a shallow hole you dig for someone else. Justice is building a mountain so tall they can't climb over it." He reminded her that the only way to truly defeat a crooked system was to not just expose it, but to build a better, cleaner, and more ethical rival. His words cooled her down, channeling her energy from destructive rage to constructive focus. She realized her goal wasn't to tear Mr. Thorne down. It was to use his own history to empower all the people he had tried to suppress. Her mission was to flip the script entirely. Just as she was mapping out her next, more strategic move, Julian's anonymous tip came through. It was a cryptic link to a hidden server. Amara logged in, her fingers trembling. She found a single, compressed file labeled Legacy. She downloaded the file and clicked play. What streamed through her speakers was a crackly audio recording of a private conversation between Mr. Thorne and his now ailing father, Harlan. Their voices were chillingly clear. They spoke in code about protecting the integrity of the firm and the proper way to deal with undesirable business owners. The casual malice and open discussion of their long history of using intimidation and sabotage to maintain market dominance was staggering. Amara listened to the horrifying details, realizing this was not just proof, but the smoking gun that could bring the entire Everest empire down. If you're still enjoying this story, share this video with someone that needs to watch this video. The audio recording was the moment Amara's fight moved from personal indignation to a pursuit of corporate justice. She played the file again, listening to the casual cruelty in Harlan and Mr. Thorne's voices as they detailed their system of weeding out undesirable competition. They discussed her mother's case with a chilling lack of emotion. The recording was the undeniable proof that Everest Investments was built on decades of systemic discrimination. She immediately called Lennox the ghost. She didn't have to explain. She just held the phone up to the speaker and let the voices of the father and son fill the silence. Lennox listened intently. When the recording finished, he didn't offer praise, only a grim confirmation. "That's them. No question." Harlan's arrogance was always his weakness. He then dropped a disheartening truth. Because the recording was obtained without their consent, likely by Julian's shadowy associates, though Amara couldn't prove it, it might be inadmissible in a formal court of law. It was illegally gathered, which meant her smoking gun could be legally useless. Amara's heart sank. It felt like hitting a wall. The system was rigged to protect the powerful, even when their crimes were recorded. But Lennox, the veteran legal strategist, wasn't deterred. "We don't need the courtroom for this, Amara. We need the court of public opinion. We need to hit them where they keep their money and where they keep their pride." He told her that what was inadmissible in court was gold on cable news. He outlined a plan that required ice-cold patience and maximum theatrical effect. It wouldn't be a quick explosion. It would be a slow-motion demolition, brick by poison brick. He needed her to hold onto the rage and turn it into calculated strategy. Amara knew the recording couldn't be released casually. The impact had to be maximized. She realized she needed one final, quiet interaction with Mr. Thorne, a moment of subtle confrontation that would serve as a powerful bookend to the initial 2-hour humiliation. This last interaction would be the final, silent piece of bait before the public slaughter began. She realized she was no longer an entrepreneur. She was an executioner of corporate injustice. Her mind was focused, her purpose clear. She knew exactly what she had to do to lure Mr. Thorne into a final, false sense of security. Amara executed her plan with clinical precision. She called Mr. Thorne's office again. Acting as if the previous humiliation had been a minor scheduling error she had completely forgiven. She requested a new, brief, one-on-one meeting, framing it as a discussion to explore potential investment strategies moving forward. Mr. Thorne, arrogant and clearly pleased that he hadn't broken her, agreed to the meeting, likely believing she was crawling back to beg for a chance. He couldn't resist the opportunity to patronize the young black woman he had just dismissed. The meeting took place in a small, windowless conference room in a neutral building. Mr. Thorne was his usual smug self, talking down to her, using confusing financial jargon, and acting completely disinterested. He kept glancing at his watch, clearly impatient to leave. Amara, however, was the picture of collected grace. She didn't mention the acquisition or the archives. She spent the entire time subtly talking about the core values of her company: equity, opportunity, and empowering the overlooked. She spoke about how vital it was to foster talent from diverse backgrounds, especially those facing initial financial hurdles. Mr. Thorne listened with an air of condescending amusement, occasionally interrupting her with a dismissive comment about idealism versus market reality. He didn't realize that every word she spoke was a surgical strike against his family's corrupt ideology. He completely missed the underlying meaning, simply viewing her impassioned speech as proof that she was too soft and emotional for the cutthroat finance world. He was too blinded by his own privilege and prejudice to recognize the trap being set right in front of him. Amara held his gaze, her expression serene, while inside, she was screaming with the decades of injustice he represented. The meeting concluded without an agreement, just as Amara planned. Mr. Thorne stood up, offering a condescending smile and a handshake, telling her to keep working hard. As he turned to leave, Amara delivered the line that was supposed to rattle him, not just as a CEO, but as Patrick O'Malley. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that only he could hear. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her eyes locked on his, "my mother always taught me that every action has a consequence. I'm excited to see what the consequences of your family's actions will be." His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a flicker of fear and deep confusion. He knew what she was hinting at, but he couldn't possibly know how much she knew. The next day, the moment of quiet confrontation gave way to the public explosion. Amara's mentor, the influential Mr. Harrison, used his vast network to secure a primetime slot for a major press conference. The room was packed with journalists from every major U.S. financial and news outlet, all buzzing with anticipation. Amara walked onto the stage, dressed impeccably, her composure radiating a fierce, unwavering strength. She began by talking about her company's inspiring journey, detailing the difficulty of building something successful in a system often stacked against independent thinkers. She spoke movingly about her late mother, honoring her legacy of perseverance and integrity. The audience listened, captivated by her personal story. She was building a solid foundation of empathy before she introduced the destructive truth. She then took a dramatic pause, the silence in the room hanging heavy with anticipation. The moment had arrived. Her expression hardened, shifting from remembrance to righteous indignation. In a calm, clear voice that echoed through the room, Amara dropped the first devastating revelation. I am here today not to announce a merger, but to expose a crime against economic fairness. She then announced that over the last few days, her team, working with a confidential source, had uncovered irrefutable proof of a decades-long pattern of systemic financial discrimination and sabotage carried out by a major financial institution. She made sure to name the firm clearly and repeatedly, Everest Investments. Then came the final, shocking twist. The man who oversaw these actions, and the man who continued this legacy of hate, is known today as the CEO of Everest, Mr. Thorne. But his real identity, the identity under which he was rewarded for the systematic rejection of my mother's dream and countless others, is Patrick O'Malley. At that moment, a massive screen behind her lit up, displaying images of the handwritten memo from Harlan Thorne and the official promotion notice for Patrick O'Malley. Then, the silence was broken as the audio recording of the father and son discussing their malice began to play for the entire world to hear. The press conference was a shockwave. Cameras flashed, reporters erupted in a frenzy of questions, and the story immediately dominated every news cycle in the United States. The recorded voices of the two Thornes, discussing their discrimination with such cold, casual arrogance, outraged the public and the financial community alike. Everest Investments' stock plummeted instantly. Their investors fled, realizing the decades of high profits were likely tainted by illegal, unethical practices. The public reaction was visceral. People were sickened by the blatant, generational abuse of power. Mr. Thorne, now scrambling under his real name, Patrick O'Malley, held a panicked, ill-advised counter-press conference, sweat beading on his brow as he weakly denied the charges and attempted to dismiss Amara as a vengeful opportunist. He claimed the recordings were fabricated and the documents were taken out of context. But his denial was too frantic, and the paper trail Amara had released was too meticulous. His history as Patrick O'Malley was now public knowledge, and every decision he had ever made at Everest was suddenly cast in a dark, discriminatory light. He was exposed and isolated. Later that evening, Amara received a series of aggressive calls and texts from Mr. Thorne, now completely unhinged. He was screaming, threatening to use all his remaining power to sue her into bankruptcy and destroy her company. Amara answered one call, her voice perfectly calm and composed. "You already tried to ruin me, Mr. Thorne," she said, cutting him off before he could finish a sentence. "You tried to break my mother. You tried to ruin every small business that challenged your narrow vision. You failed. The truth is out now." She hung up, a sense of icy triumph washing over her. The moral support for Amara was overwhelming. Her company was flooded with new offers for partnerships and investments from ethical firms eager to align with her integrity. But the most significant blow to Mr. Thorne came the next morning. A massive class action lawsuit was filed against Everest Investments on behalf of every Black and minority-owned business that had been unfairly rejected or targeted by the firm since the 1980s. The floodgates of justice had opened, and people inspired by Amara's bravery were lining up to testify. The sheer weight of the lawsuits and public condemnation began to completely dismantle Mr. Thorne's life. The once untouchable fortress of Everest Investments was crumbling around him. More and more victims came forward, their stories mirroring Amara's mother's struggle. The narrative was no longer about a slighted CEO. It was about systemic oppression finally being brought to light. Amara felt a deep satisfaction, not from revenge, but from witnessing justice finally unfolding. Amid the professional implosion, Amara found a quiet, necessary moment of comfort. She visited her father, James. They didn't need to speak much. He simply looked at her, his eyes shining with pride, and told her that her mother's legacy was finally safe. He said, "She would have been proudest that you didn't become bitter. You took their hate and turned it into opportunity for others." His words cemented Amara's resolve. The goal was not to punish, but to permanently correct the historical imbalance. The emotional contrast was stark. While Amara's professional life was soaring due to her moral courage, Mr. Thorne's personal life was falling apart. The news reported that his wife, a prominent socialite who had carefully maintained her pristine image, had filed for divorce. The reporting was vicious, revealing that her decision wasn't just about the financial scandal. It uncovered a deeper, more manipulative past. The papers hinted that years ago, Mr. Thorne had actually orchestrated the breakup of her first marriage to a black man, paying the man off and using his father's resources to isolate his then-fiancée. The depth of the man's moral corruption was bottomless, reaching into the most intimate parts of his life. The complete unraveling of Mr. Thorne's empire culminated in a shocking development. A powerful consortium of ethical investment groups, determined to capitalize on the market chaos and redeem the financial district, approached Amara. Their offer was simple and breathtaking. They wanted to partner with their company to buy out a controlling interest in Everest Investments. She realized the ultimate victory was within reach. She could not only acquire the company that humiliated her, but she could completely change its DNA. If you're loving this story so far, smash that like button and let us know with a fire emoji in the comments. The downfall of Mr. Thorne, the man formerly known as Patrick O'Malley, was swift and absolute. He was forced to resign from Everest Investments in disgrace, his reputation permanently shattered by the public release of the audio and the damning documents. The once smug CEO became a pariah, unable to land any consulting work or secure funding. His life, built on his father's corrupt legacy, collapsed. The climax of his professional destruction was immediately followed by a devastating piece of personal news. His elderly father, Harlan Thorne, the founder of the system, suffered a severe heart attack while watching a news segment detailing Amara's public exposé. Amara felt a complicated mix of emotions. It wasn't joy, but a deep sense of finality. The system that had caused so much silent pain for her family and others was finally cracking. She took a moment of quiet reflection, driving to a scenic overlook where she often went to clear her head. The revenge she sought wasn't about making him sick. It was about tearing down the structure he used to hurt others. As she watched the city skyline, the massive Everest building standing starkly against the glass towers, she felt the weight of the past lift. She was suddenly brought back to the present by a series of congratulatory calls, culminating in a meeting request from none other than her respected mentor, Mr. Harrison. When she met him, he wasn't there to offer wisdom. He was there as a key player. He smiled broadly and told her he was leading a consortium of ethical investors who recognized the value of her integrity. Their proposal was audacious and beautiful. They wanted to buy out the now vulnerable, free-falling Everest Investments. Amara, he said, pushing a thick contract across the table. You told me you wanted to build a better system. Well, here is your chance. We want you to be the one to orchestrate the acquisition. You will tear down their foundation of hate and build a tower of opportunity in its place. The concept of not just beating them, but owning them and fundamentally changing their mission was the ultimate poetic justice. Amara picked up the pen, her hand steady, realizing her destiny was not just to manage her own company, but to redeem an entire financial institution. The buyout offer was accepted by the desperate, crumbling Everest board. Amara was tasked with leading the strategic dismantling of the old, toxic culture and infrastructure. The ultimate act of power wasn't the press conference. It was this quiet, internal surgery. Before she started, Amara needed one last moment of closure. She drove to the cemetery and stood by her mother's headstone, the sun warm on her back. She spoke out loud, detailing the entire unbelievable journey, the 2-hour wait, the hidden documents, the audio confession, and finally, the acquisition. She felt a profound connection, as if her mother were standing right beside her. Amara told her, I'm not just successful, Mom. I'm stopping them from doing this to anyone else. We did it with kindness, just like you taught me." The moment was deeply emotional and cleansing. She realized that this wasn't revenge. It was the completion of her mother's unfinished fight. This victory felt heavier, more meaningful than any multi-million-dollar deal. As Amara turned to leave, something caught her eye. It was a faint, small inscription etched into the granite base of her mother's headstone, almost covered by moss. She knelt down and brushed away the debris. It wasn't anything religious or formal. It was a line of text she had never noticed before, placed there by her father. Her legacy is not in what she built, but in the people she helped. The simple, powerful phrase struck her. It was a compass pointing her toward her next, greater mission. Inspired by the inscription, Amara knew her work was just beginning. This acquisition couldn't just be about cleaning up the balance sheet. It had to be about creating the opportunities the old regime had stolen. She realized the key to the future wasn't just exposing darkness. It was aggressively funding the light. She smiled, feeling a new wave of energy. She knew exactly what she would name the reclaimed firm. Amara gathered her team and the key investors to announce the new direction of the newly acquired firm. The room was tense with expectation. Amara stood before them, resolute. "We are not just changing the name," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "We are changing the very soul of this institution." She revealed the new name, the Phoenix Group. "We will rise from the ashes of hate and discrimination and become a beacon of economic opportunity." The core of her announcement was the creation of the Legacy Opportunity Fund, a multi-billion-dollar investment vehicle designed specifically to fund minority and women-owned businesses, the very people Everest had intentionally shut out for decades. The fund would be seeded using a significant portion of the assets recovered from the lawsuits and the firm's newly cleaned-up profits. It was a revolutionary act, turning the tools of oppression into the engines of empowerment. The team erupted in applause. After the announcement, as Amara was fielding excited questions, she noticed a figure hovering nervously near the back door. Julian, the former mole. He looked thin, defeated, and utterly alone. He approached her, his head bowed. "Amara, I know I don't deserve this, but I wanted to apologize one last time. I lost everything, and I blame myself." He explained he had no job, no money, and no prospects. He humbly asked for any work, even janitorial duties, just to be part of the good she was building. Amara looked at him, remembering her mother's lesson about kindness being a strength. Julian was a victim of Mr. Thorne's ruthless manipulation, too. She recognized his genuine remorse. She agreed to a private meeting later that day. She told him, "I won't let you start over where you were, Julian, but I believe in second chances." She decided to offer him a job, a low-level, administrative position with no access to sensitive data, where he could slowly, painstakingly earn back trust and contribute positively. The moment of ultimate triumph and reflection arrived. Amara entered the former Everest Investments headquarters, now officially under the banner of the Phoenix Group. She walked past the empty receptionist's desk where Bethany had dismissed her, feeling nothing but cold indifference. The place held no power over her anymore. She took the elevator up to the executive suite and walked into what was once Mr. Thorne's office. The room was sterile and silent, stripped bare of his arrogant personal effects. She sat in the plush leather chair behind the massive desk, the former throne of her adversary. The simple act of sitting there felt like the ultimate closure. It wasn't about the view or the corner office. It was about the change it symbolized. She had taken high ground and converted it into a source of good. She was not bitter. She was simply victorious. She realized that the best revenge wasn't rage, but systemic change. As she stood up, ready to begin the final phase of renovation, the site manager approached her. "Ms. Jade, we found this tucked away in a locked cabinet in the old desk. It looks important." He handed her a sealed, heavy envelope. It was a handwritten letter, addressed simply to whoever finds this. The letter was a detailed, tear-soaked confession from Harlan Thorne, the founder, written just before his final collapse. He confessed his deep regrets about the system he built, his fear that his son would be consumed by it, and a shocking admission that the systemic hate had ultimately destroyed his own family, leaving him isolated and heartbroken. He ended the note with a haunting sentence. He wishes he had shown more kindness. Amara read the letter, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. The depth of the family's betrayal and the consequences of their actions were staggering. Even in his final moments, Harlan was afraid. She realized her struggle wasn't just against a man or a company, but against the very poison of hate and entitlement that consumed them from the inside. She put the letter down, the revenge complete, replaced by a quiet sense of empathy for the human wreckage left behind. The revelation in Harlan Thorne's letter confirmed Amara's deepest belief. Hate always consumes the hater in the end. She chose not to publicize the confession, seeing it as the final, sad closure for a tragic family. Her focus was now entirely on the future. The final scene opened on the magnificent, newly renovated headquarters of the Phoenix Group. The architecture was bright, modern, and open, reflecting a philosophy of transparency and access. The doors were wide open, and the lobby was bustling with energy. Amara stood near the entrance, watching the first class of entrepreneurs arrive for the inaugural Legacy Opportunity Fund training session. They were diverse, young, and filled with the same hopeful ambition that had once driven her mother. This was the moment of complete redemption, the ultimate undoing of the 2-hour wait she endured. She saw a young black woman step nervously through the glass doors. The woman, dressed in a slightly too formal suit, hesitated, overwhelmed by the grand, hopeful space. Amara smiled, seeing a powerful reflection of her own younger self, filled with both brilliance and trepidation. The woman was exactly where she needed to be. Amara walked over to her, her voice warm and genuine, her whole posture radiating confident mentorship. She placed a gentle, encouraging hand on the woman's shoulder. It was a powerful, symbolic gesture of welcome, an invitation to a system built just for her. The final shot is a close-up of Amara's face, serene and victorious, then panning to the inscription above the new door, which reads, "Opportunity for all." Amara looked at the young woman, her smile conveying the weight of history and the lightness of hope. "Welcome to the future," Amara said, her voice strong and unwavering. "We've been waiting for you." If you loved Amara's story of strength, resilience, and ultimate triumph over injustice, don't miss out on what she builds next. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments below, what name should Amara give the first business the Legacy Fund invests in?